Captain Emma Brooks never expected the biggest conflict at her younger brother's wedding to come from her own family. Just minutes before the ceremony, her mother quietly pulled her aside and whispered, "Please, take off your uniform. You're embarrassing the family." She held out a garment bag containing an expensive designer suit and begged Emma to change before the guests arrived. Without saying a word, Emma closed the bag, thanked her mother, and walked into the ballroom wearing her formal military dress uniform. At first, people simply looked at her. Then, one by one, 12 elderly veterans slowly rose from their seats in silent respect. The room fell completely quiet. Moments later, the bride's billionaire father began walking directly toward Emma, and what happened after that would change her family forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Leave a comment below. And now, let's get back to the story. My name is Captain Emma Brooks, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 13 years, I've proudly served in the United States military. That uniform has been with me through disaster relief missions, overseas deployments, emergency rescue, and unforgettable moments that shaped the person I am today. Every medal and ribbon on my chest represents the sacrifices, courage, and teamwork of the people I served alongside. To me, it has never been about personal recognition. It has always been about honoring those who stood beside me. Unfortunately, my family never saw it that way. To them, it was simply a uniform. When my younger brother, Ethan, announced that he was getting married, I was genuinely excited for him. He and his fiancée, Claire, had spent months planning a beautiful wedding at a historic estate just outside the city. Nearly 150 guests were expected, including successful business owners, respected community leaders, and several influential families. About a week before the ceremony, my mother called me. Her voice was unusually cautious. "Emma," she said, "we need to talk about what you're planning to wear." I already knew what she meant. "I'll be wearing my dress uniform," I replied without hesitation. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she finally sighed. "Sweetheart, please don't." I frowned. "Why not?" She answered carefully. "It's going to draw too much attention. This day is supposed to be about Ethan. Please wear a normal dress instead." My eyes drifted toward my perfectly pressed uniform hanging neatly in my closet. "I've worn this uniform to military ceremonies, memorial services, and formal weddings," I said calmly. "It's completely appropriate." My mother's voice softened even more. "Most people don't understand military tradition." I smiled quietly to myself. Maybe this is an opportunity for them to learn. She didn't argue any further, but before hanging up, I could hear the disappointment she was trying to hide. On the morning of the wedding, I carefully polished my shoes until they reflected the light. I straightened every ribbon, checked every medal, and made sure each piece of my uniform was exactly where it belonged. Looking at myself in the mirror, I wasn't trying to stand out or impress anyone. I was paying tribute to every service member who had stood beside me through the hardest moments of our lives. At that point, I had no idea the greatest challenge I would face that day wouldn't come from strangers. It would come from the people I called family. The wedding venue looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine. White roses decorated the entrance, a string quartet played beneath towering oak trees, and guests dressed in elegant suits and designer gowns filled the courtyard with laughter and conversation. As soon as I stepped out of my car, I noticed several people looking toward my military uniform. Some offered warm smiles, while others gave respectful nods of appreciation. Before I could even reach the entrance, my mother hurried across the courtyard toward me. She wasn't smiling this time. "Emma," she said quietly but firmly, "come with me." My mother guided me into a small bridal suite and quietly closed the door behind us. Without saying a word, she picked up a garment bag resting on a nearby chair and slowly unzipped it. Inside was an elegant navy blue designer dress. Looking at me with hopeful eyes, she said, "I bought this for you." I looked at the dress for a moment before meeting her. "You really thought I was going to change?" She clasped her hands together and pleaded softly, "Please, before anyone else sees you." I took a steady breath and answered calmly, "Mom, everyone has already seen me." Her expression tightened with frustration. "That's exactly what I'm worried about." A few moments later, my father stepped into the room. His eyes immediately landed on my uniform before he spoke. "Your mother is only trying to keep unnecessary attention away from the wedding." I looked at him without raising my voice. "I'm not wearing this to attract attention." He let out a quiet sigh. "We just don't want people talking." Without another word, I gently zipped the garment bag closed and placed it back on the chair. If people choose to talk because I'm honoring my service, then I'm perfectly comfortable with that. Neither of them replied. I straightened my jacket, tucked my service cap beneath my arm, and walked out toward the ballroom. As I entered the reception area, conversations grew noticeably quieter. Some guests greeted me with warm smiles, while others simply watched with curiosity. I quietly took my seat near the back of the room, hoping all the attention would remain where it belonged, on Ethan and Claire. As the ceremony began, however, I noticed something I hadn't expected. An elderly gentleman seated across the aisle leaned forward, carefully studying the medals on my uniform. A second older guest did the same. Within moments, several veterans exchanged silent, knowing glances with one another. It was clear they recognized far more than the uniform itself. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. Ethan and Claire exchanged heartfelt vows beneath an arch decorated with white roses as sunlight filtered gently through the trees surrounding the estate. For a while, everyone seemed to forget my parents' earlier concerns, and I was thankful for that. After the ceremony ended, the guests moved into the grand reception hall. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room, while soft music played in the background, and dinner was served. I remained quietly at my table near the back because the evening wasn't about me. It was about celebrating my brother and his new wife. After dessert, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and smiled at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before we begin the first dance, we'd like to recognize the veterans who are with us tonight. If you have served our country, please stand so we can thank you for your service." Around the ballroom, several elderly men slowly rose to their feet as the guests applauded warmly. Then something completely unexpected happened. One gray-haired veteran looked across the room and suddenly stopped. His eyes locked onto the silver star displayed above my ribbon. Instantly, he stood a little taller and spoke in a clear, respectful voice. "We have a Silver Star recipient with us tonight." The applause faded into complete silence. One by one, every veteran in the room turned to face me. Then, almost as though they had shared the moment 100 times before, all 12 veterans came to attention at the same time. Every conversation in the ballroom came to an immediate stop. One veteran quietly removed his cap. Another raised a sharp, respectful salute. Within seconds, the others followed. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Slowly, I stood from my chair and returned every salute with the same respect they had shown me. No words were needed. The silence carried more meaning than any speech ever could. After several long seconds, someone in the crowd began to clap. Another guest joined in, then another. Within moments, every person in the ballroom was on their feet. The applause filled the hall, echoing from wall to wall. I looked toward my parents. They stood frozen in place. My mother covered her mouth, unable to hide her emotion, while my father stared quietly at the veteran. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the uniform he had wanted hidden wasn't attracting attention because it was inappropriate. It was earning genuine respect and inspiring everyone who saw it. That realization was only the beginning of a night none of us would ever forget. As the applause slowly faded, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had completely changed. No one was whispering about my uniform anymore. Instead, people looked at it with admiration and appreciation. As I lowered my salute, I noticed an older gentleman rise from the head table and walk confidently toward me. Tall, dignified, and instantly recognizable, he was William Harrington, Claire's father, a highly respected businessman, generous philanthropist, and the leader of a family foundation that had supported education initiatives and veterans programs across the country for decades. As he crossed the room, conversations naturally faded until the ballroom became completely quiet once again. William stopped in front of me, smiled warmly, and extended his hand. "Captain Brooks," he said, "it's truly an honor to finally meet you." I shook his hand firmly. "The honor is mine, sir," I replied. He then accepted the microphone from the master of ceremonies and turned toward the guests. "If you'll allow me," he began, "I'd like to say a few words before tonight's celebration continues." The room listened in complete silence. "For more than 20 years," he continued, "I've had the privilege of supporting organizations that help veterans successfully transition back into civilian life." He gestured toward the 12 veterans who were still proudly standing nearby. "During that time, I've met remarkable men and women who dedicated themselves to serving others with courage and selflessness." Then he looked directly at me. "But having the opportunity to meet someone whose service has been recognized with one of our nation's highest military honors is exceptionally rare." The ballroom grew silent once again as every guest focused on his words. William smiled before continuing. "Captain Brooks, your uniform hasn't taken a single moment away from this wedding." He paused briefly, allowing his words to settle over the room. Instead, It reminds all of us that commitment, sacrifice, and service to others deserve to be recognized wherever they are found. Several guests nodded in agreement. Today, my daughter and my new son-in-law are beginning a marriage built on commitment, he continued, looking around the ballroom. And I can think of no better example of that same commitment than someone who has devoted her life to protecting and serving others. The applause returned even louder than before, filling the ballroom once again. As I quietly thanked him, William leaned a little closer with a gentle smile. I hope you don't mind, he whispered, but in honor of today's celebration, I've already arranged a donation to a charity that supports military families. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My eyes filled with tears as I realized his kindness had turned what began as an uncomfortable evening into a tribute far greater than I ever could have imagined. That's incredibly generous, I said quietly, still overwhelmed by his kindness. William smiled and gently shook his head. No, Captain, he replied. His eyes moved toward the veterans and then briefly toward my family. True generosity begins when we recognize people who deserve to be seen. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Ethan smiling with unmistakable pride. For the first time that day, my family was no longer trying to hide my uniform. They were finally seeing the woman who had earned the right to wear it. The reception carried on, but something inside our family had quietly changed. Guests didn't approach me because of my medals. They came over to shake my hand, thank me for my service, or share stories about relatives who had once worn the same uniform. One elderly woman stopped in front of me with tears in her. My husband served for 30 years, she said softly. Seeing you today reminded me of him. Thank you. Her words touched me more deeply than she could ever have known. A few minutes later, my mother slowly walked over. The anxious expression she had worn all afternoon had disappeared, replaced by humility and emotion. Emma, she whispered. I turned toward her. I'm sorry. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked down at my uniform before continuing. I wasn't embarrassed by you. She paused, searching for the right words. I was afraid people would stop focusing on Ethan and Claire. I smiled gently. I understand. She shook her head. No, I don't think I understood anything until today. She looked around the ballroom, where guests were laughing, dancing, and celebrating the newlyweds. The wedding is still just as beautiful, she said through. And somehow, your uniform never took anything away from it. I reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Respect doesn't steal someone else's spotlight, I said. It simply reminds us there are many different reasons to celebrate. Just then, Ethan walked over wearing the biggest smile I had seen all day. He wrapped me in a warm hug and laughed. You know, I spent weeks stressing over flowers, music, and seating charts. I never imagined the most meaningful part of my wedding would be something none of us planned. Claire joined us, still holding her bouquet. She smiled warmly and said, I'm proud to officially call you my sister. Before I had a chance to answer, one of the 12 veterans approached with a friendly grin. Captain Brooks, he said, we're taking a group photo before everyone heads home. We'd be honored if you stood with us. As we gathered together, the photographer raised his camera and asked everyone to move a little closer. To my surprise, my parents quietly stepped in behind the veteran. Without hesitation, my mother slipped her arm around my shoulder, while my father stood proudly beside me with a smile I had never seen before. The camera flashed. It wasn't just capturing another family photograph. It was preserving the moment my family finally stopped seeing the uniform before the person and started seeing the daughter who had been wearing it all along. That wedding became one of those family stories everyone talked about for months, not because of the elegant decorations or the beautiful venue, but because 12 veterans had stood together in silent respect. More importantly, people remembered everything that happened after. A few months later, my mother surprised me by asking if she could attend a military appreciation ceremony on my base. She quietly watched service members greet one another like family, listened to military spouses speak about long deployments, heard parents proudly talk about their sons and daughters, and listened as veterans shared stories of sacrifice, teamwork, and lifelong friendship. On the drive home, she reached over and gently squeezed my hand. I understand now, she whispered. It was never really about the uniform. I smiled. It never was. Not long after that, Ethan and Claire began volunteering with a local veteran support organization. My father started attending fundraising events with them, and for the first time in my life, he introduced me with unmistakable pride. This is my daughter, Captain Emma Brooks. Those simple words meant more to me than all the applause I had received that evening. Looking back, I realized that respect doesn't always come when we expect it. Sometimes people need time to replace assumptions with understanding. And when that understanding finally arrives, It has the power to heal years of quiet misunderstanding with a single sincere act of acceptance. It has now been almost a year since my brother's wedding. Every time I carefully hang my dress uniform back in my closet, I remember my mother's words from that morning. Please take it off. Those words no longer hurt, because today she sees what she couldn't see then. The uniform was never about attracting attention. It was about honoring commitment, sacrifice, and the incredible people who served beside me. My family no longer sees medals or ribbons first. They see a daughter, a sister, and a woman who chose to dedicate her life to serving others with pride. If this journey taught me anything, it's this. Never hide the part of yourself that reflects years of honest sacrifice, hard work, and dedication simply to make someone else feel comfortable. The people who truly love you will never ask you to become smaller. Instead, they'll stand beside you with pride, exactly as you are.